Free agency, a time in the NHL where franchises can either strike gold or sink themselves into years of regret. While a big signing can revitalize a team or even push them into contention, the wrong contract can become a weight that's too heavy to carry. Over the years, there have been some pretty questionable signings, and today I'm going to revisit some of the worst ones throughout recent memory. Now, something I need to mention here, this list will not include contracts that are just re-signing players, so a guy like Rick DiPietro will not be featured on this list. These are contracts that may have looked nice on the surface, but as time passed, they would age worse than expiring milk. And trust me, there are some pretty brutal deals on this list. But before we get into the topic of today's video, we have two different housekeeping things to touch on. First off, as always, thank you guys for supporting the channel. If you want to see more stuff like this, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. It really helps support everything that I do over here and allows me to create more fun stuff like this for you guys, which I feel is very important as we enter the off season. Second thing, we got to read off the comments from my last video, so let's talk about some of my favorite ones from my most recent upload. Alright, so these are all comments that came off my most recent upload talking about the top UFAs of 2025, their salary projections, and where I think they're going to land. With the first comment coming from @JasonKNEZ, who says, if Giroux wants a cup, Toronto is not the place to go for that. Now, two things here. The reason I mentioned Toronto for Giroux is, one, I think that they're closer to winning a cup than Ottawa. I know some people disagree with that, but on paper, I still think Toronto has a better roster. Two, I think that location is important for Claude Giroux, so really this projection is based off of whether or not he wants to win a Stanley Cup within the next couple of years. I think he's 36, 37 years old, and for a guy who is going to have such a huge legacy, I think adding a cup to his resume is going to be important. So if it's not going to be Ottawa, I think Toronto is the best place, but I understand why people have reservations about Toronto probably not winning a cup anytime soon, but I'm hopeful. I think they turned the corner this year and should be more competitive as we move forward. The next comment comes from @Cameron Babineau, who says, how about Patrick Kane to the Oilers, providing Dry with a winger? I don't hate this, especially if you're willing to pay a guy like Jeff Skinner $3 million. I think giving Patrick Kane a one-year deal at $4 million wouldn't be the worst thing. I do think that the Oilers are looking to get a little bit younger and quicker, though. I'm not sure if Patrick Kane fits that mold, but depending on who's available at this free agency, I expect the Oilers to be very aggressive. So this is a player who I could actually see signing with that team. The next comment comes from @KamikazeBen252, who says, agree with your take on Bennett, but I feel that Messier is more likely to stay than Ekblad. He's looking for his payday after 2 cups, and Florida would be okay using that extra cap in other players in hopes they can replace him, similar to how they replaced Montour, Jones, and Forsling, as your decor isn't shabby. Look, I understand what you guys are saying, but if you're Florida, why would you invest more money into a 37-year-old winger who won't be with your organization very long when you could have a 29-year-old top defenseman who fits so well with Forsling, has said that he wants to stay with the organization, and will likely take a pay cut? I love Brad Marchand as much as the next guy, but I think you guys are kind of overvaluing how much of an asset he's going to be moving forward. Yes, he was great on this cup run. He had a lot to prove, and I still think he's going to be a great player for whatever team he signs with, but I think that people are just underestimating how great Ekblad was for the past 2 runs. So if I'm the Panthers personally, I'm signing Aaron Ekblad over Brad Marchand if I had to pick one or the other, but let me know what you guys think. Which player would you rather have moving forward? And the last comment comes from @HuntedHut, who says, no way Kane goes to the Rangers. He felt betrayed by them. And not only that, Kane and DeBrincat's families are very close. They're good friends, and the rest of their family is close. Archie calls Kane uncle, and Kane talks about how much he loves being in Detroit. I see him re-signing with the Wings. 2 things about this comment. First, yes, I know he's close with DeBrincat and their families are close and that he loves the Red Wings, but I do think that there's potentially more out there, and it's all going to be about his priorities, similar to the Giroux conversation. Does he want to add to his legacy, or is he okay just riding it out with the team that he enjoys playing for? Only Patrick Kane can answer that question. Second, Where did you hear about this betrayal from the Rangers? I think the Rangers did pretty well by the guy. He wanted to go there. They tried to go on a cup run, but his injuries just didn't allow him to be the same Showtime that we saw in Chicago. He then missed the next season because of the hip surgery he had to have, and there were a lot of question marks about whether or not he could make a comeback. So it's not exactly like there was any betrayal. Patrick Kane just had a lot to prove. So I would love if somebody can explain that. I don't remember there being a falling out, but I still think that the Rangers and Patrick Kane could be on good terms. But thank you to everyone who commented. If you want to be featured in the next video, be sure to drop your thoughts below on this one. And with all that being said, let's continue on the topic of free agency and talk about the worst free agent signings in recent memory. So at number 10, coming off a Stanley Cup final appearance with the Boston Bruins in 2013, Nathan Horton was one of the top free agents on the market. He had scored 22 points in 43 career playoff games with Boston and was seen as a powerful, clutch top six winger who could score goals and bring a strong net front presence. After 9 consecutive seasons of scoring double-digit goals, including a career-high 31-goal season, the 28-year-old power forward Nathan Horton would sign with the Columbus Blue Jackets to a 7-year, $37.1 million contract. But the move quickly unraveled. Plagued by injuries, Horton appeared in only 36 games and scored just 5 goals before being traded to Toronto in 2015. Nathan Horton was by no means a bad player, and at the time I actually liked this signing for Columbus because I felt like he fit their roster pretty well. Unfortunately though, the back injuries and the length of this extension just came out to be a complete failure for the Jackets. Over the course of the deal, they paid over $30 million for 5 goals. Yikes. And this one became a lesson to a lot of other organizations on how risky long-term deals, especially to players with even minor injury history, can completely derail a franchise's momentum. This next contract is actually pretty recent. The Oilers were coming off a Western Conference Finals appearance in 2022 and badly needed some stability in net after running it with a over 40-year-old Mike Smith. After years of cycling through inconsistent options, they turned to Jack Campbell, who had shown flashes of high potential as the Toronto Maple Leafs starter. In 2020-2021, he posted a .921 save percentage, followed by a 31-win season in 2021-2022, albeit those 2 years did have their inconsistencies. The biggest criticism of the Edmonton Oilers has been their inability to put a goaltender in net that can backstop Connormcdavid to a Stanley Cup, and Jack Campbell was supposed to be the answer to all of their problems. However, following the 5-year, $25 million contract that he signed with Edmonton, he would go out and be the worst goalie of the year that season. Campbell's record that year was 21-9-4, which is propped up a lot by how great the Oilers' offense was. His goals against average was a 3.41, save percentage of .888, and goals saved above expected was at the bottom of the league. By November of 2023, just 16 months after signing that contract, the Edmonton Oilers decided that enough was enough and decided to waive Jack Campbell to their AHL team, where he never ended up bouncing back, and that was the last time we ever saw him compete with Edmonton. This next one actually was a suggestion by a fan, so be sure to drop your thoughts below because sometimes I'll use them in these videos. But this one is Mark Messier, a living legend when he signed with Vancouver. He had won 6 Stanley Cups, including the 1994 Cup with the Rangers, ending their 54-year drought. He was a proven leader and viewed as one of the greatest captains in NHL history. The Canucks signed Messier to a 3-year, $18 million deal worth $6 million per season. They felt like he was the missing piece to their otherwise underachieving yet talented team, featuring players like Pavel Bure. Unfortunately, though, the Messier they got was nothing close to the Messier of the Rangers. At 36 years old, he was clearly past his prime, and over 3 seasons with the Vancouver Canucks, he played in 207 games, had 158 points, was a -32, and made 0 playoff appearances with the organization. Over his time with the Rangers, Messier was a living legend, but once he put on that Canucks sweater, he started to play slower, uninspiring hockey, which is crazy to connect the two, Messier and anything that's negative, but in reality, that's what happened. In fact, one of the most controversial moments of this deal came when Messier was given the captaincy over Trevor Linden, a beloved homegrown leader and fan favorite who had led the Canucks to the Stanley Cup final in 1994. The optics were terrible. The new guy, fresh off the contract negotiation, walks in and takes the C from the heart and soul of the team. It just never really sat well with the fans. Vancouver didn't return to the playoffs until 2001 after a full-scale rebuild. Linden was eventually reacquired, but only after years of dysfunction and fan anger. And Messier would leave in 2000 to return to the Rangers, where his farewell years were forgettable. Messier will always be one of the most historic and legendary players for the game of hockey. However, if you paid attention to his career, you can look back and say that this was definitely a stain on his otherwise fantastic resume. This next contract will rub any Islanders fan the wrong way. It was back when they decided to sign Andrew Ladd to a 7-year, $38.5 million deal worth $5.5 as the AAV. The Islanders had just lost key free agents like Franz Nielsen and Kyle Okposo, and were looking to fill the void with a veteran who could bring scoring, leadership, and playoff experience. Andrew Ladd, a two-time Stanley Cup winner, had just put up 25 goals in the 2015-2016 campaign and was seen as a reliable middle six winger. Ladd was 30 years old at the time of signing, but the decline was immediate and very steep. In 2016-17, he had 23 goals but only 31 points overall. In 2017-18, he had 12 goals in 73 games played. And from 2018-2019 onward, injuries and demotions rarely kept him within the NHL lineup. Ladd's $5.5 million AAV, combined with his deterioration of skill, injuries, and the backloadedness of the contract, was a complete anchor for the Islanders and became a huge problem for them as they tried to build around John Tavares over those years. In 2021, the Islanders finally unloaded Ladd to the Arizona Coyotes by attaching multiple draft picks, a second, a third, and a conditional second. Ladd only played a handful of games for the Coyotes, but this was essentially just a cap dump. The deal overall hurt the Islanders for years and was one of the worst free agency signings of recent memory. July 1st, 2016 will always be one of the worst days in Boston Bruins history, and not because it was the most egregious contract, but because it was one of the more silly ones that they could have ever signed. At the time, David Backes was a respected veteran leader, former captain of the St. Louis Blues, and known for his physicality, toughness, and two-way play. He had just come off a season with 21 goals and 45 points and was considered one of the top available free agents back then. Now let me explain the Bruins' thought process here. They had a slightly aging core of Bergeron, Krejci, Chara, guys who had won at the highest level, still had a little bit more to offer, but needed some help within their middle six, I would call it, to kind of propel them forward. And David Backes coming off that season did make a little bit of sense, but signing a 32-year-old to a $30 million deal where he's only going to decline from that point really was a bad decision in hindsight. Almost immediately after joining Boston, his speed and ability to keep up with the modern NHL pace were in question, and with that, his production steadily declined. Eventually, Boston needed to move off of this David Backes contract. It was aging so poorly, and they needed the room to sign guys like Pastrnak and McAvoy. Finally, they found a suitable partner in the Anaheim Ducks who would take Backes along with a first-round pick just to eat the salary. But in the end, this is one of the worst contract signings of Don Sweeney's career. For this next one, let's stick with the trend of talking about former Boston Bruins players. Only this time around, it wasn't Boston who made the mistake of signing this player. Back in 2016, Louis Erikson was given a contract by the Vancouver Canucks, 6 years worth $36 million, $6 million per season. At the time of signing, Erikson was coming off a 63-point season, 30 goals with the Boston Bruins, and he clearly had some chemistry with the Sedin twins playing with them for Sweden's international team. The Canucks believed that he could slide into a top-line role and help extend the competitive window of their aging core, but unfortunately, that's not what happened. At the time, the Canucks were going through a bit of a retool, and they needed some help within their top six. With Louis Erikson becoming a free agent, having the ability to kind of help out on the power play, mentor young players, and fit in seamlessly with the Sedin twins, this felt like a good signing at the time. Unfortunately, Louis Eriksson's peaks in Boston would be nowhere close to the player that the Vancouver Canucks got. In his first season with the Canucks, he scored just 11 goals and 24 points in 65 games played. Over the full 6-year deal, he recorded just 38 goals and 90 points in 252 games. By year 3, Erikson was often a healthy scratch or playing on the fourth line. The Canucks were paying $6 million per year for a player contributing less than replacement level value. He quickly became a prime example of a dead cap contract. And the last contract on this list, the longest one mind you, was Christian Ehrhoff, who signed a 10-year $40 million deal with the Buffalo Sabres worth $4 million per year. Ehrhoff was a smooth-skating, offensively skilled defenseman who had just helped the Vancouver Canucks reach the 2011 Stanley Cup Final. He posted back-to-back 40-point seasons with the Canucks and was seen as a power play quarterback with solid top-pair upside. The Buffalo Sabres were very eager to make a splash in free agency that year, trying to make their small market into something that people could see as a true contender. And Ehrhoff was supposed to be the answer to a lot of their problems, fixing their power play and adding a little bit more stability to their defense. Buffalo wasn't anywhere near contention though, and within a year it became clear that the team was heading towards a rebuild. So signing a 10-year contract with a 29-year-old offensive defenseman made no sense for a team with no playoff foundation. By 2014, the Buffalo Sabres had entered full rebuild mode, and Ehrhoff was a guy they just didn't want around in their organization anymore. However, the length of the deal and his production made him almost unmovable, resulting in the team having to buy him out, which is why he's number 1 on a list like this. But hey, these are some of the worst NHL free agency signings that I could come up with. Again, I tried to avoid the ones where a player was signed to an organization and then just signed an extension. I felt like it defeated the purpose of this exercise, but if you guys can come up with some worse ones, be sure to drop those in the comments below. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I have a few other pieces of content for you to watch while we go into the off season, just to keep you busy while hockey's not on. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next episode.